Hi, good afternoon, and thank you for being here, Graham, and thank you to members of our audience who are watching with us today. This particular talk on community cohesion and the benefits of community cohesion by the JC Foundation Trust. Just a few words to introduce Graham before we start. Graham is one of our trustees at the JC Foundation Trust and an expert in his field. Graham wears two hats. He's an accomplished educator and also a community leader who has led members of the community for many, many years and has been instrumental in making changes in the Jewish community here in Manchester, in particular in North Manchester, over the years. There is very little that Graham doesn't know when it comes to the community. And also the other hat that Graham wears is that of an educator. And Graham is a very knowledgeable educator. Through his work with the King David College and through other work in the field of education in the community. And also there's a third element to what Graham does, and that is increased reaching out and bonding with other communities. And so we will get to hear more about these aspects and how how Graham will share with us his insights into the benefits of community cohesion. So without further ado, let's do a deep dive into this particular topic. Graham, over to you.
Thank you very much. I don't know about the deep dive. I hope there's water in the pools that don't hit my head. But anyway, thanks to that extremely kind introduction. It sounded more like you were talking about yourself. Anyway, it was very kind of you to say those things and to think those things. I think I'm a great believer. Sometimes the more simple you keep a message, the better. I think I want to start kind of in terms of setting the scene. I can't think of anything nicer to spend a bit of time on a Monday, the beginning of the working week, talking about community cohesion and also, which obviously a great part of it, interfaith work and connections, because this has always been a passion for me. It's always been a passion for me. And I feel very, very strongly whenever people talk about racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, the very, very first thing that comes to my mind, as Margaret Thatcher said, education, education, education. Well, allegedly she said that. Most of her quotes she denied she ever said them. But anyway, without question, education breaks down barriers. And I'll give some examples from my experience. But just to start off, which I was going to say before, and it feels good for me to kind of pay tribute. Unfortunately, I'll just show you this from the Jewish Telegraph last week. Might be seen on the screen upside down. But anyway, very sadly, our family a few weeks ago lost my aunt very suddenly, Anne Harris, who was the chief Rebbetzin, the emeritus chief Rebbetzin of South Africa. And I think you see a picture of her with Nelson Mandela and a picture of my aunt and my late uncle. Now, I mentioned this, it's a very good starting point. It's very poignant, as I say, because that article is current. My aunt, Anne Harris, nee Boyers, some of the listeners may remember the family because they're actually a Manchester family. And my aunt grew up across from Steen Court in a house that was there before they built the flats, obviously. And she and my uncle were my mentors. They really were my mentors. And I started with giving them as an example. As I say, you can see this, probably just about see this photo of my aunt with Nelson Mandela, who's got his arm around her. You know, you probably wouldn't have seen Chief Rabbi Mervis or Mrs. Mervis with their arms around the Queen. They had a very close relationship with President Mandela as he was at the time. And my uncle was also very much into interfaith work, and very much his philosophy was, right, he was chief rabbi of South Africa. Obviously, he's there to encourage Yiddishkeit and support of Israel, etc. But his philosophy was, and it was actually quite controversial at the time, but it's relevant to where my starting point was, the Jewish community has to be proactive in building the new South Africa. You've got to roll up your sleeves and you've got to be involved. And he actually said from the pulpit many times, which was really controversial, or you know, leave, go to the UK or go to Israel, whatever. And he was very, very firm about this. And he, you know, this is the ultimate. He established a charity. Sadly, he's passed away. My aunt's now passed away, but this charity still exists called Africa Tikkun. We all know Tikkun means repairing. And this charity, when we were there in South Africa, when he was fortunately still with us, and quite a number of years ago for his farewell, and my uncle sadly was already not very well, but my aunt took the visiting party of family and friends to one of their projects, and it was fantastic. You know, I'll never forget it. It was fantastic. It was in a township where they were doing a lot of work to improve the living conditions. And the residents there in Afrikaans, I think, one of the languages, called my aunt and uncle Prince and Princess. And it's really wonderful because this is community cohesion, right? And this is interfaith work, right? At its height. In this township, there was a painting that one of the residents had done with Nelson Mandela in African chief costume and a few other people. I think there were a few other leaders of the ANC as well on this, well-known people on this painting. And my uncle was there as well, wearing, in this painting, African chief's costume. Now think about this. This is for, you know, this shouldn't be tokenistic about community cohesion, interfaith work. Think about this. Isn't this fantastic? Right, there's a painting in a township with the African leaders and the president wearing African national dress, and my uncle's in it as a Jewish leader with them wearing in the painting African dress. Think, you know, that is a fantastic image and a fantastic thing to aspire to. And also, which is very much part of this, because I hope I can say this, because like Prince Harry, I'm not a great fan of the media, but when you think right, that you can, when you actually think, you know, we particularly at the time when apartheid was dismantled, everything, there was a lot in the media focusing on how difficult things were going to be. But, right, what about the good work that was happening, right? Was it ever publicized? And this is relevant to Manchester because this is the ultimate. Was it ever publicized that President Mandela formed a statutory body, one of the few countries in the world where such a thing exists, called the National Religious Council, that the government had a statutory responsibility to consult over major issues, right? all faiths represented on this group. My uncle, as I say, was very much into interfaith work. He even helped draft the new South African constitution. Now, the point I'm making, to bring it back, that's, you know, my overall kind of my overall concept that I follow. To bring it down to local issues, community cohesion and interfaith work, it has to be meaningful, not tokenistic. And this is why, and as I say, there's this lovely link with my aunt, who just passed away a few weeks ago, as I say, brought up in Manchester and spent 35 years of her life in South Africa, proactively ensuring in a community, a country with very troubled past, that there was proper cohesion. And in fact, this says it all. And this is the epitome, how this is what, you know, we should be aiming for. And in terms, as I say, the context, that was the word I was looking for, the context. I found out only comparatively recently that when sadly my uncle passed away at quite a young age, the equivalent, I think it was called the Star or something, I can't remember, but the equivalent paper in South Africa to our Daily Mirror and the Sun had my uncle's passing as the front page. It said Shalom Rabbi Harris, and he was described as the hero of the masses. And they even made a program about him on television, and it said, we've got to all get together, we've got to. That is proper community cohesion, right? Where it's meaningful, it's sincere, it's proactive, and their charity, which still exists today, and it's got branches in 3 or 4 countries in the world, including this country. You know, they've gone, but this charity lives on. The purpose of it is for the Jewish community to be proactive in the general community by helping the general community to advance and therefore ensure community cohesion and mutual respect, etc. So that is the purpose of it. Although that is, of course, a Jewish, you know, in reality is a Jewish thing to do that. The charity, as I say, it's not kind of got a Jewish focus per se. It's to do this work. And my uncle, and I've never found anybody, no one's ever found another book written. He actually wrote a little book, which I have. She gave me just before he passed away, and he signed for me, which is called the Jewish Obligation to the Non-Jew, Source Material. And I've never seen a book like this. No one else has ever, you know, if you look in libraries, etc. The only kind of whatever renowned Rav who's written a book on these lines. And this is really important. So what I'm saying is, they are my mentors. They are the people that have taught me what you should be doing. And it shouldn't be tokenistic. And also, according to this source material from my late uncle, it's even actually an halachic imperative that you do this. So what I'm saying is community cohesion, not a tokenistic thing. Oh, I've been to that liaison meeting, tick the box. And then actually 2 hours later, you've actually forgotten what you actually did that day, let alone that you went to the meeting, right? It needs to be meaningful, and it has to have a very high education content. Now, I've always been really interested in interfaith work and community cohesion, and always from, obviously, issues of anti-Semitism and any racism are more than extremely important. That goes without saying, and I take anything that's happening in statistics more than very seriously indeed. But what I like to see, and I feel passionate about this, instead, not that it's not important, don't be misunderstood, but instead of poring over statistics, we should be getting out there and educating, right? And educating. I had a client from Eastern Europe. Apart from one example I give, all the rest are Manchester things. A client from Eastern Europe, and it's interesting. Obviously, Neil covered my head. He actually thought I was a Muslim originally, and he dropped me off once. I didn't have my car. He dropped me off at Shul once during the week, and he thought it was a mosque. Anyway, it got on. I don't talk about Israel; it's not relevant. But he mentioned about Israel. And he was particularly concerned that Muslims were barred from living in Israel, which of course we know is far from the case. And when I explained it, right, not aggressively, not put in any way, putting him down, whatever, explained it, he didn't really have an axe to grind. He was fascinated and he took it on board. And he was interested to hear that in a street in Israel, you can have a church and a shul and a mosque virtually next door to each other. He was interested to hear this, because people very often, they're not educated, and we just write off everybody's anti-Zionist, everyone's anti-Semitic. It's not their approach. It's about education, right? It's about education. Now, to give examples, I mean, this is the only example today which is not from Manchester. To give you practical examples in terms of how you can do this. So I just saw a note, something in chat which was interesting. Anyway, I once did one of the first interfaith things I did many years ago, and I'll never forget it as long as I live. I started an area youth council, and it's quite interesting. Some of my colleagues in the local authority sector and the voluntary sector were a bit skeptical. I think firstly it was quite a new thing, and maybe they were jealous, I don't know. But what we did was we had young people. It's fantastic. We had young people. This is real community cohesion. We had young people from all faiths, including the Baha'i faith, which is quite a small faith in the world, but really an interesting faith. And some of you may know they've got their headquarters in Haifa, and they kind of do pilgrimages to there. But they're really very, very nice community. And I built a very strong relationship with them. And the guy actually was a Baha'i member, young man, who became, I think he was either the first or the second chair of this youth council, and he invited me to his wedding, which was really, really nice. And absolutely fantastic community. So we not just kind of Christians and Jews, but every community we had young people from, and it was fantastic. It was fantastic. We did some events where people, like a kind of a fair, promoted information about their own culture, their own religion, and we did social events. And the committee, as I say, was mixed. We had representatives from all youth communities of different kinds. I remember we did a disco. We did it was social and religious, but it was fantastic. It was fantastic. All the young people got on extremely well. They learned a lot. They were interested. And whenever we were planning something in the diary, I remember it's a long time ago, as long as I live, it's fantastic. So the young people took out their diaries and they would say, have you got any festivals then, Jay, or whatever, have you got any festivals? Are you sure it's all right for us to then? Oh, it's Ramadan. Will you be okay? Will you feel comfortable if you're fasting? And it was fantastic. And there was an equality. There was an equality. We're all equal, all got our culture. And it's interesting. Oh, what? Right. You've got a festival in the Baha'i community. Don't know much about that. Tell us about it. Tell us about it. And it really, and everybody, it was a group of teenagers with respect for their own culture and religion, feeling comfortable sharing it with others. And it was really, really good. And that is where you get meaningful interfaith work and meaningful community cohesion. And as I say, whenever I hear about statistics in terms of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anything that is totally, completely and utterly unacceptable, I immediately think about education, because I know, right? And I'm always careful what I say, able to back it up. But I know that with that group on that youth council, if they heard, because of their involvement in this project, if they heard any unacceptable comment about another faith group or community, I know that they would challenge it. Maybe before, they would have, even if they didn't think it was acceptable, they would just ignore it. People ignore things, etc. But now I know they would say, hang on a second, hang on a second. I have a friend from the Muslim community. We're on a committee together. He's a fantastic young man. How dare you say these things? I know it would be challenged. And to bring it back, which I know Jay would be very surprised if I didn't mention, because it's really interesting. I've got a training company. We do various things, and about 18 months ago we received unexpectedly a very large careers contract. And when on our team, I'm actually the only qualified careers advisor. But I enjoy that anyway. So I had to take that work, and other people do some of the other stuff. Anyway, and I looked at the schools that I was offered to go into, and I saw one of them was a Muslim girls' school academy, and I immediately said, I'm going there. I'm going there. That's absolutely, if I go nowhere else, that is absolutely, I'm going there. I knew it would be a fantastic experience. It's been even more than fantastic. But I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot about Islam, and it's incredible how similar it is to Judaism, which makes people interested, makes people comfortable. I knew it was similar, but to be honest, more similar than I realized. And also these girls who are ambitious, polite, absolutely, it's the best school I've ever worked in my life. They've given me all time, and I'm very much part of the school. They insist on getting me kosher food if there are events and stuff. It really is the most fantastic experience. And religion comes up, and we talk about stuff, and they ask me questions, and we learn, and any barriers, misunderstandings, they just ebb away. They just ebb away. And it's really interesting to see that these girls are very ambitious, very intelligent, with a very, very, very high motivation to be part of the general community in this country and to contribute. And that's something that the Jewish community has very much in common with them. And there is just so much common ground. And it has been and is. I just love even going into the building, the atmosphere, and it has been a really wonderful experience. They're very interested in interfaith work. In fact, I heard this wasn't actually, there's some connection. It wasn't through my school, but it's a slight connection. But I heard of somebody going, a Muslim young student going on a teaching practice recently, and insisting that it was in a Jewish school so that she could learn more and be part of it. A lot of fantastic stuff is going on, and this is kind of meaningful stuff to go into the environment and to educate and be part of another community and learn and breaking down barriers. And it has been the most wonderful experience, and the school very much up for interfaith work, very much community cohesion, and they should be praised for it. It's kind of come from them more than it's come out from outside. It's really to be praised. And this has nothing to do with me, it predates my involvement. Every Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, Rabbi Rickman comes to the school, and he does an Jewish assembly for the entire school, not just as one you ever, over 600 girls. And this is what the school have asked for. And this is meaningful interfaith work, and it shows that we all, at the end of the day, we all have the same aspirations. These are girls from Manchester, living in Manchester, wanting to contribute to Manchester, wanting to be part of Manchester, wanting to make contributions to society in Manchester, just the same as the rest of us. It was all of us, all the different groups that live and work and are brought up in Manchester. And we all share a common vision about society and what we want, particularly religious communities, because the philosophies are the same. And community cohesion is something, as I say, which enables society to work much more positively together. And there's nothing, and I've said this to people. I've got some of my colleagues involved in the school there with promoting their careers and offering work experiences. And I told them, I guarantee you will enjoy it, and they have. And at the end of the day, offering the hand of friendship to other communities. I've given an example, the school, the youth council I did, etc. Offering the hand of friendship to other communities in this troubled world is really something. It's a big mitzvah. It's it enhances our community, it enhances society. It's a big mitzvah, and particularly in the troubled times we live in, it's more than important. But I think, to sum up, there's three things. It's about education, 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 for people to know and understand and feel comfortable with. And people are amazed at the similarities between all the major faiths. That's the first thing. Secondly, it has to be meaningful. I gave the example of my uncle actually, starting a church. I mean, when did he have time to do that? When did he have time to do that? He was chief rabbi of a community that was in turmoil, going from totally different situation, the new republic, etc. How did he have time to do it? But he found the time. So actually, it has to be meaningful, right? I'm not saying these things are important, but to go out for an hour and on an arranged basis and give around a piece of matzah at a church, whatever. I mean, it has its benefits, but it's got, and then you go and you think you've done something. It has to be something meaningful, not tokenistic, but something really powerful and meaningful. Okay. And thirdly, I gave the example as to how my aunt and uncle, my late aunt from Manchester, have been role models for me in terms of how you behave. And even my uncle maintaining, through a very well researched little book, that is the halachically, it's imperative halachically that the Jewish obligation to the non-Jew, that we are proactive in society to encourage interfaith work and community cohesion. Anyway, those are my introductory points.
Graham, absolutely fascinating to listen to yourself expound on the virtues of community cohesion, as you say, through meaningful education and reaching out to others. And as you say, through this obligation that we have to non-Jews. We are, after all, a light onto the nations. Now, the questions are coming through as we listen to yourself, very much to do with where we are at the JC Foundation Trust. And that is something that you taught us this afternoon, this importance of community cohesion and the importance of finding common grounds with other communities. And as you were mentioning that, whether in South Africa or elsewhere, or the Baha'i community, there are practical areas where the JC Foundation is involved, one of which, and I will mention just two of them. One is well-being and health, and the other one is this recent cost of living. And so what I want to say is this: how do you see community cohesion and common ground with other communities playing out, say, in finding out that we have the same problems as other communities when it comes to isolation, when it comes to mental health, when it comes to addictions, when it comes to issues with vaccinations and so on and so forth. And the same goes for the cost of living. We have the same issues that other communities have. And like you said, All it takes is being in the same space, talking to other communities, and all of a sudden the barriers are down. Is this something that you think, from a practical viewpoint, is the way forward, or?
Yes, that's a really good point. And fortunately, something did cross my mind as you said that, because it's very much as you say. I mean, the issues are the same, and in right. Well, to answer the question and a little bit of background, what's crossed my mind, and I was involved in a little bit of this last year, and again, I was really pleased about it, is perhaps joint volunteering or cross-community volunteering. Now, it's interesting, and I thought of a good example. I think it's called Rainbow Surprise. I did probably quite an historic thing, because I did last year. I arranged must have been about 100 work experience for my students at the Muslim Girls Academy, and simultaneously I arranged, again, it was about actually probably a little bit more, it was 2 years, but anyway, whatever, there's a couple of hundred work experiences for Jewish teenagers. It was all done at the same time. And it's interesting, and I've only thought of this as you said this, there was one project which is run by people from various communities, but it's non-denominational, where some Muslim girls and also there was at least one Jewish guy went and volunteered together, and they had a lovely time. Well, it's distressing what you see, but in terms of the satisfaction, and they volunteered together, and I was delighted by this. And the teenagers got on very well, and they did so together, and they had people from all communities coming to use this project. It does a lot more than this. It's a fabulous project. It does more than this, but it largely has a food shop at reduced prices, community prices, and it also has a food bank. But and to say, the people who run it are from various local communities, but it's non-denominational, and this interfaith people from both communities working together to help the community in general was a really practical thing. And in fact, I think that one person actually, I think it was a Jewish guy, I think he actually did an extra week there or something. He was so motivated. But this was these two, they're not the only communities, faith communities in Greater Manchester, absolutely, but these two large identifiable communities, the Muslim community and the Jewish community, they were working together for the common good. So that's certainly a practical thing, and I was delighted that happened. And it was very successful. And an interesting thing, you can also, so that's one thing, doing things jointly. Another thing that's just crossed my mind this second is about actually learning from each other, because what I was really pleased with, and I haven't seen this in any other setting, at the Eden Girls Academy, when I've been involved in parents' evenings, obviously, well, either to do with careers, or I was there to do the careers bit. But what was really, really good, and I've not seen this anywhere else, but we can learn from it, and other communities can learn from it, they had a table of people from local charities and the local authority with information about issues that people may face, for example, heating, cost of living crisis, mental health, etc. And this was really impressive. I've never seen, I mean, I've probably worked now in 7 or 8 different schools, and obviously connected with other community groups, and I've never seen anybody incorporate that, to be honest. It was really good in an event that wasn't directly connected to it. If it's a self-help or well-being event, then yes, understandably, but these were either ordinary parents' evenings, just seeing how your child is doing, or careers evenings. So they were not indirectly maybe, but not directly connected to well-being. But as I say, they had the local authority there, They had voluntary groups there. They had a lot of local authority and other printed information that people could take. And I got talking to them to kind of network with them, because this was very impressive. And again, this is an example where you can learn, because I've not seen that done in our community, unless, yes, we have events looking at those issues, but I've not seen that incorporated into anything that on the face of it is disconnected from those issues. So that was really good. We can learn from each other and network. So that was very useful. But I think looking at the issues, because rightly all the issues you've said are issues across all communities, particularly at the moment. And if we can do things together and volunteer together for the benefit of all sections of the community, then that is obviously enhances community cohesion, and again, education. And the philosophy, our Muslim brothers and sisters, their philosophy towards charity is identical to ours. And in fact, and it's for the community in general, our girls are involved in a food bank where they make up packages, I think it's every week or two in school, for local food banks for the community in general. And again, if we're collaborating, like I had a little bit of that last year in this project, if we're collaborating as communities, I mean, Mitzvah Day is another good example. In fact, when we think about it, when we do have projects where we collaborate, so more of that, again, is going to ensure community cohesion. But there is, which is really good, there is a willingness, there is certainly a willingness, as you've mentioned, in Greater Manchester, which doesn't necessarily exist in other areas, which is partly because other areas may have their faith communities, non-Christian faith communities, including Jewish communities, may be very small. So, there isn't the infrastructure. But here, there is infrastructure, and there is a willingness. In fact, to give you an example how things develop, the Eden Boys School this year, for the first time, they actually asked, oh, can we have Rabbi Rickman as well for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which was really nice. He'd normally, not sure actually his leagues, I think it was 3 other girls with a girls' school, but the boys' school asked. And this is important. So education, doing things together, volunteering together, initiatives together. These are the way in which we have community cohesion and encourage it. And as I say again, in a meaningful way.
Yes. And that brings me on to something that happened recently, and that is an experience that I had. As you know, the JC Foundation is very much involved in prevention, especially when it comes to the younger generation. Prevention of behavior that could be deemed as risky behavior or even addictive behavior, such as gaming and so on and so forth, because we know that when children go up to their bedroom upstairs, nobody really knows what's going on. So to bring it back to community cohesion, we were talking very much about this topic with our Christian friends, and this lady, and she was a Muslim lady, and she was from YGAM, and that is the Youth Gambling Organization. And she explained to us the difficulties and the challenges that young Muslim kids are having with this particular issue. And funnily enough, they're exactly the same issues and challenges that we're having. And so, very much so around education and increased awareness and the youth, and talking to children like Rabbi Rickman does in schools and so on, is the way to go. I mean, we're all finding that is the way to go, to A, educate and prevent, and B, because if we are talking together about a common challenge and a common problem, then we're not fighting one another, we're not insulting one another, we're not hating one another. And yes, I mean, that is very much what I get from what you say, Graham. And the only issue that I have is that in the area where we are, which is, the Jewish and local area where we operate in North Manchester, we're almost living in a bubble because, the community is here and so on. And a lot of us are very much amenable to community work and to charity and tzedakah, which really means justice. And like you said, when you go further afield, is that something that we should be encouraging throughout society? I know there are institutions out there, there are authorities and so on and so forth, but it's very much the grassroots, the concept of it. I mean, because, this is something that is taught from a very young age, this concept of tzedakah. How do we begin to address that? I don't know.
That's a good and difficult question. I think, and in fact, that issue actually came up with a meeting that some of us had with Lord Mann recently. That very point came up, and I think a few things crossed my mind. It's not an easy question to answer, but we should be encouraging it. I think one answer, as you know, every local authority has what's it called, the Standing Committee, I think, for Religious Education, SACRE, which is a statutory body. I'm the delegate in Rochdale. So every area that has a local education authority, so it covers the whole country, sometimes the borough, sometimes the county, depending on the structure. They have this body, and the Jewish community has a right to be, as much as any other, to be represented on it. There is an issue because there are very many places in the country where there are no Jewish communities. Sometimes, though, we still get people from neighbouring communities to come and play their part on the committee. But to a certain extent, it's not, it's not as it's not as proactive and kind of meaty as it should or could be, for obvious reasons, because of the role is limited. But the SACREs certainly do try to do that to a certain extent, and that very point did come up with a meeting with Lord Mann. In fact, he was the one who more or less brought it up by saying, how do we get this point across that you've just said, in areas where there are very few Jewish or Muslim communities. And there weren't, the SACREs was actually one point. There aren't, there aren't easy answers. However, I know that there is work being done through, which you'd know as well, through the Board of Deputies. And in fact, we know how small the Jewish community is, because their education officer is one of my daughter's, not a phrase that I like using, but actually very best friends. So I know her well, both professionally and personally, and there's a lot of work. For example, to give you another practical example, not just the SACREs, the board, as you know, I'm sure, have upgraded their Jewish living exhibition, and that is, as much as possible, going around the country, particularly to areas where there are no or very few Jews, to try and make people more educated. So there's a little bit of that happening. I mean, one of the issues, of course, is where where there are, in reality in this country, and I know I've worked in a lot of these areas when I worked in rural areas. I mean, there are large parts of the country where there are rural villages, and there are very few people from any kind of minority. So it is, that it's an issue in terms of people actually getting involved with each other because the people aren't actually there. But in terms of the educational side, through the Sacres in a limited way, but through the Jewish Living exhibition and other initiatives, we certainly are trying to get the message out that nobody from any community has a horn, and we're all British citizens wanting to contribute to the country and wanting to work together within keeping our own religion and cultures. So particularly to say the Jewish Living exhibition is something which is trying to do that as much as it possibly can. And I think the last thing, again, which I know I'm pressing this point a lot, but it is, you see, again, and I'm not saying, I don't want to be misquoted, I'm not saying it isn't important, but if there are Jewish people, particularly from very, very, very small communities around the country, and they're sitting and poring over anti-Semitic statistics, right, which are important, and we need to take this on board. I don't doubt that, but I would rather that they also focus on education, because for me, going to and I'm involved now coordinating the Jewish volunteers group, as I've called it, going into schools in Greater Manchester, which I'm now coordinating, and so we're going to be having some sessions for the volunteers who are involved in this, and again, I want people not just to pore over the anti-Semitism statistics, but to say, how can we get out there? How can we educate people? Oh, I didn't know Muslims could live in Israel. Oh, right, really? Right. To educate people, right? We've got nothing to hide. Other communities have got nothing to hide. But to educate people, to break down barriers, to extend the hand of friendship like my uncle did in South Africa, in sincerity. And this film that they made about him was really amusing, and they made it South African television. There's even a little shot of me at the end. The fantastic program they made. It's weird for me because my grandma who lived with us was on it, and it's really weird. But anyway, there was basically, they don't call it that, but basically the chief imam of South Africa. That's not a title they use, but the equivalent, the head of the council, the Muslim Council. And it was really nice what he said, because he said in this program that he loved working with my uncle. Didn't always agree over everything, but he loved working with my uncle. And Desmond Tutu actually also said something really interesting, because he said a really lovely thing. And this is cohesion. This is breaking down. He said about my uncle. He said, when you hear things like this, he said, I'm so glad, it was a blessing for me to be an archbishop during the time that Chief Rabbi Harris was here. I'm so glad that I had that privilege. That's such a nice thing to say. And it was amusing. He said, we got him like a house on fire. He used to ring when my uncle was ill. He rang personally. He used to ring my uncle. How are you doing? How are you doing? They really became real good friends. That's what breaking down barriers does. And he said, but I wouldn't have liked ever to cross him, because I'm quite a strong character, my uncle. But the point was, he said, it was a blessing for me. I'm so glad that he was here at the time and that I was working with him. When they were coming out of apartheid and building a new society. And it's fantastic. It's fantastic. I knew that they had done a lot of this work, but I didn't know the depth of it until we went out there. But this is it, community cohesion, where you're sincere, where you break down barriers, you're doing things together, joint projects. As I said, Michael started a new charity with a friend, and it's not tokenistic. And you might start off very small, that's okay, but it has to be meaningful. And again, as I say, at the end of the day, going back to your question, it's difficult because they're not Jewish people active in every part of the country, if even areas where there are no identifiable Jews. But we can still, which the board is doing, still try and get education out there, so people can see I don't use word like commonality, I don't like all those kind of words, that people can see the common links and the common sharing between all religions. And I just, at the end of that question, and probably come up to the end of the session maybe in a minute, but just to tell you it's a nice little story anecdote, and this is what it means when this is fantastic to me, these two little stories, and it sums up everything about people feeling, breaking down barriers, and being two little stories. Firstly, one girl from Eden said to me last year, and I'll never forget this as long as I live, and I use this as a kind of a motif for my work. she said to me, I think she brought up the subject, I can't remember how, but she said to me, sir, she said, Islam and Judaism are so similar, we're on the same team, sir. It always brings tears when I said it. I thought, this is fantastic, young teenage girl, we're on the same team, sir. What a lovely, lovely thing to say. What a meaningful thing to say. You know, showing understanding, we're similar, we're on the same team. Never heard a phrase like that before. Fantastic. And then another thing to show, you know, how you break down barriers and everything, and it's much more cohesive. I was talking to one girl in a careers interview, and she's saying she wants to travel a lot, and we're looking maybe jobs that are involved in travel and whatever it was. So I just said to her, you've got the same issue as us, because, you know, you can only eat, we only eat kosher, you can only eat halal, some Muslims eat kosher, etc. So, you know, it's more difficult. We've got to find out, you know, when we're traveling, we're more limited what we can eat. So we were just sharing that. And she went on to talk about Jewish food, and she said, sir, she said, I love matzah. I love matzah. So I said to her, oh yes, we eat it on Passover. And she looked at me puzzled, and she said, don't you mean Pesach? so, so there you go. That is where you have an understanding and community cohesion and an education. The people are comfortable, they understand, and it's a wonderful thing to be part of. It's a wonderful thing to be part of. And this is the point, you see, you know that if people have been part of this, you know, I know, not that I'll ever expect it to happen, but if my Eden girls went out and they heard anything untoward, anti-spirit, anything, I know they would turn around and say, that is not acceptable. That is not acceptable. And, you know, I make it really my last point, unless there's any questions, because I'm on a roll now. The last point, everyone has to do, it's not just for me, but when the first time I went into Eden School, you have to sign a code of conduct, right? And that's got about 10 different things. So this is not just about racism and prejudice. The very first point on it, and you were not allowed into the building till you sign it. The very first point is, we will not tolerate in any way anti-Semitic behavior in any shape or form, will not be tolerated on these premises. Now, it was talking about no racism or prejudice, and then it gave examples, and it mentioned anti-Semitism first. And I was so impressed with that. And at the end of and I was actually thinking, someone else actually said to me, how many Jewish schools have I ever worked in or been connected to that in a code of conduct for visitors or staff, whatever, have at all, let alone as their first rule, that Islamophobia or any other prejudice will not be tolerated or allowed. I mean, you know, that's fantastic. And as the examples I've given, Rabbi Rickman being asked, and all these things, making sure I've got kosher food, making sure I've got private room to daven, all these things, they actually have a policy that community cohesion between our girls and the rest of the community has to be serious, it has to be high, it has to be meaningful, it has to happen. And the more institutions and organizations that have that and do it in a meaningful way, through education, you know, learning sessions, discussions, whatever it is, joint volunteering, all the examples we've given today, the more that do that, the more we have, you know, the more we have in these very trying times, a more compassionate and a nicer society. And we can all do our bit, but I think, you know, holding the hands of friendship, the hand of friendship to other communities is very, very rewarding. And I've taken other people, as to say, who not done this before and are a bit reticent, what's it going to be like, etc. And I tell you, you're going to have a lovely evening. And they all said, we had a lovely evening, we want to help these girls, you know, we want to help. And this is the point: education, education, education. Thanks.
Indeed, Graham. Education. As we wrap up our session, we could talk about this subject for hours and hours and hours, but we don't have hours and hours and hours, and unfortunately, so. But we will come back to it at a later stage, and we will expand on the topics that we talked about today. The fact that we know that education has to be meaningful and sincere for it to be effective and to have an impact. We know that there are other facets and aspects of community and community cohesion that are yet to be explored within our community and with other communities that are very similar to ours. I mean, you know, we're on the same team, as it were, and especially from a psychological viewpoint, when we want to lessen conflicts with another group, we look for commonalities and we look for goals, what we call superordinate goals, goals that transcend both groups. And some of those goals are dealing with mental health issues, dealing with racism in all its forms, and dealing with addictions and so on and so forth, because we all suffer from them. But I would like to thank you, Graham, very much for today's chat and the questions that we were able to address. And as I said, we will come back to some of these topics and expand on them. But for now, thank you very much, Graham, and have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay.